Hi there, welcome to episode 18 of Side Chat. In this episode, James and I talk about motivation, personality traits, and social identity. To know more, stay tuned. As usual, if you have any questions or suggestions, please send them to sidechat@omnisci.com or tweet to side_chat. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Well, it's another episode of Side Chat, and today, as usual, I have my co-host with me, James Molikirk, um, from Johor in Malaysia. Hi, James. How are you?
Dr. Austin, always a pleasure.
It's nice to have you back again. Now, subsequent weeks we have been talking so much about motivation. We talked also about personality, and I think this week we were kind of looking at how should we put everything together. And I think this is a good episode. I think to put a little bit of what we were talking about previously about traits, about motivation, and then I think today we kind of perhaps look at what does it all come up to, more of who we are, kind of identity here. So maybe a question: how well do we really know ourselves? And then you were very nice. You sent me a couple of articles, and then there was this particular article that you say, can you please say this thing on the podcast? So I'm going to uh, say that phrase actually from Benjamin Franklin. There are three things extremely hard: steal, a diamond, and to know oneself. I mean, we know the first two, they are really hard. But knowing ourselves, is it really that hard? I think when we talk about things like that, we always talk about the fundamental question: who am I? Self-concept, self-identity, right? And what does it really mean? And you very kindly sent me some references. Uh, Something from, maybe if I could read that, something from Brewer and Hewstone. Their perspective, what self and identity embedded in the interpersonal relationship and social group memberships. Uh, they actually give some examples in there. They said, well, I became a doctor because my parents wanted it. I became a soldier to make my father proud. I joined the club because my friends wanted to be in it, etc. And I think from that kind of very simple explanation of self and identity, we become part of a group, really. We want to be belonging to something. Therefore, that itself becomes our identity. So I think it goes back a little bit more also with our fundamental understanding of what self is. So going back to our textbook, I think Vygotsky and also Erikson and Mead, they all had common grounds of what self is, and they agree that self is not context free, and it would change and kind of evolve depending on where we are and as an individual. And of course, that also comes with a bit of ego development, and then eventually how our identity formed. Now, all sounded very, very serious and very academic there. So this is where I go, okay, I shall turn on my non-academic mind now. Let's have a less
You have
serious
one?
let us kind of turn my non-academic mind to maybe a bit more casual discussion about this. But I know you want to perhaps talk a little bit about McAdams' personality level of personality. I'll leave that to you. But what we just said. Are we any closer to knowing who we are at all?
Yeah, it's almost a philosophical question. At the same time, the psychological side is lots to say about it. I think what you're talking about was about perhaps more first about the formation of who we are, our identity. If we just take who we are as our identity, although as McAdams would suggest, and he's not alone, if we think about our identity or who we are, identity, personality, sense of self, we've got those sort of three levels to think about. Our traits, typical behaviors, the things that drive us, and then that separate thing, which is our identity. Put those three together, and we've got a sense of, well, that's the holistic self. That is the person we're looking at. Those typical behaviors, the things that drive them and motivate them, even demotivate them, and how they pull those things together within the society they exist in to identify themselves. It's almost like a capstone of those things, that identity, and that is very socially, culturally influenced, including, of course, key caregivers. So I think that nice question about what is the self, those aspects of personality and motivation and identity, and how that self becomes into whatever it is at that particular time the person exists. And as you're saying, that all those things potentially evolve over time and within systems and are moderated, so that the self is evolving. We know identity evolved. Erikson and so on were very clear about that. There's lots of research on the social cultural side of how people do evolve through life experiences and maturation into adulthood. And in adulthood, personality sides and motivation would say that those aspects of self tend to stabilize, or at least the way that we measure it. And of course, much of the measurement of all these things is done by the self. It's self-report. So in some ways, we get even the stability of these constructs of who we are relies upon self-report anyway. So we get a little bit stuck in the method, I think, as well, of identifying it. But then there's the question of, so we know that personality is relatively stable, though it does change over time. We know that motivation is the same, and we can trace those back to sociological and genetic factors as well. So there's some stability there, some predictability about it. And the self, the sense of identity also is changes and evolves, but also stabilizes. So then the question is how well does an individual actually know who they are, whether it's their motivations, their personality, their identity? How far are they actually aware of some sort of truth?
Yes, that is like a kind of $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, I like the fact that you were saying the three components, motivation, personality, and identity, is self-driven, because how motivated we are, what are we motivated, is based on our own assessment of what we want, what we need. And personality, as we said, is stable, but we can choose to react according to the context. And the identity itself is our choice. We want to be part of a group or not. And with all these three combined together, it should actually clear that mythical question, as in, wow, you're sorted out because you already know if this three thing comes together. But of course, we also agree the fact that it is so contextual driven, and we might change our motivation. We might also change our personality to suit the context that we are in, and the identity itself depends on what we are doing, where we want to pursue, what we want to pursue, where in a work setting context, how far we want to climb the ladder, the corporate ladder. That could also impact on the concept of self. So self, as we say, the word evolve, subject to so many different factors itself. very difficult though to kind of say, well, James, you are a particular type of person, or I am a particular type of person, because we can't really do that. But I think it is a very interesting concept here, and with this self evaluation, it brings itself to a kind of a crossroad here, because when someone actually view themselves too much or too well, there might be some issues there. And if someone don't value themselves or don't see themselves as in a good light, it is also quite bad. So there are two extremes, I think. So maybe we can talk a little bit about, if someone does view themselves uh, too well or over their own capabilities, what kind of impact do you think that will cause if someone kind of overestimate themselves, maybe?
Well, so the classic, and there are classic studies really of that, of how well people are aware of themselves, their capabilities, for example.
Yeah.
So that better than average effect.
Yes.
And lots of studies in this one, and it's very easy to replicate it with a group of even 10 people, and simple questions about how far they evaluate themselves compared to their peers. And we often, when we're doing it in facilitating workshops, we'll use it for, at university, how compared to your peers, evaluate your intelligence or your intelligence, your interpersonal skills, your decision making, and normally the last question, and of course they got like average, above average, below average, and the last question we ask once they've done those 3 or 4 questions is, and your humility, evaluate your humility.
That's
and often gives the game
too.
away, because they've already rated themselves above average on everything.
Yes.
From intelligence to behaviors to emotional, whatever, management. Everyone evaluates themselves as being better than average. And as a great American study just done recently actually it's just here, I think, because these studies haven't been done in large numbers for quite some time. But in this one, they evaluated 700 people, cross-section of the US population. And it's quite recently, 2018, 700 people. And 65% of the participants agreed with the statement, I am more intelligent than the average person.
Right.
And not surprisingly, 70% of men made that claim.
Sure.
So that means about 60% of women made a lower claim. So men overestimate themselves more than women do, at least in far as intelligence.
Right. Why do you think people do that? I mean, is it because, you're just saying about men and women? Is it a gender thing? Or is it because people just perhaps are not very good at assessing themselves? Though they think they are, maybe they are not that good at doing so.
That's a really good question. I think if you ask any of the psychoanalytic folks, they would say that the last person you ask about them, themselves is a person. We're so full of psychological defenses that are conscious or unconscious manipulation, and that we use when we're in interviews or in any social situation. We do those things to protect our ego, or to promote ourselves in a particular, to put the mask on that makes us more likely to succeed in a particular situation. But the idea, I think, behind most is that it's self-esteem protecting first.
Yes.
I'm trying to tell myself that I'm better than most, although there may be very, very likely there's a strong cultural angle in that. And of course, the Americans, as far as we know, American culture in schools and so on, is always to big yourself up. You're great. You're great. You're great. You're great. Whereas the other cultures are more group orientated, more humble, less assuming. And I'm sure that there are cultural effects on that. I don't know of studies that have looked at that. I'm sure that's there. So with self-esteem protection seems very obvious.
Right.
That's why we do it. Whether that's conscious or unconscious.
Yep.
And then there's this cultural aspect of what is expected of me to show that I'm capable. Again, self-esteem, identity protection.
Yeah. So it's interesting, as you said, the psychoanalytic perspective would be protecting self, we protect our own ego. But of course, there are people to the extent where they are protecting their ego. In the kind of working environment, you and I have actually seen many people who are, apart from doing that, but they are just plain not that great at doing what they're doing. But they're still kind of, perhaps in defense of their own ego, they go around and telling people, I'm actually quite good. I'm not bad at certain things, and they have this false illusion of their own capabilities, and I think it can be quite dangerous when someone has that kind of um perception about themselves. I mean, we know this is what we call the Dunning-Kruger effect. But at the same time, I think dangerous in the sense when someone who is not knowing of their own capability, they might end up actually committing themselves to maybe a bigger project that they cannot handle. And then what do? I'm just thinking along the concept of social psychology. They might end up also becoming a social loafer, taking credits from the team and taking it as their own. Because maybe somewhere within themselves they know, what, I'm really not that great, but it's okay because I put it out there already, saying or telling people how great I am. To protect myself, I'll probably take some of that credit from someone else. So I mean, there is this component of not knowing who you are, and then the other extreme, I would say, is more of perhaps knowing yourself too well. That is such a human nature thing to beat ourselves silly. Oh no, am I really that good? Maybe I'm not that good enough, because as I compare, I mean, that's where the we were talking about identity. Maybe backtracking a little bit, identity. We want to be part of a group, so social comparison after that will come in. If I'm in the in group or I'm not part of the in group, I will be compared against or compared with, or I will compare myself or try to elevate what I am better than someone else being in an in group. Then as we start doing that as an individual, we might also fall into the category of, am I really that good? Despite the fact that you might have things to prove that, yes, you are an expert in one thing. We do also fall into that thinking of, perhaps I'm not as good as other people, because if I compare myself with James is better than me. But who am I to be giving this advice? And then and we end up having this kind of imposter syndrome, which is a real thing. And I have seen cases where people suffer severely because of that, and their self-esteem is threatened. And of course, there are devastating impact of that. People don't trust themselves anymore, and it might lead to more catastrophic effect there. And I think this is where knowing yourself is good, but maybe not taking it to the extreme, as what we were saying. Trying to protect your ego, and then on the other spectrum, doubting yourself. So human beings are pretty complex, aren't we? While we are given an opportunity to know who we are, we have to just complicate the whole process. Why can't we just be accepting who we are, from as we evolve? I don't know. What are your thoughts? I mean, this is just coming to my head.
Well, there's really lots of really great points there, Austin. First, I mean, it's basically about the benefits of accurate self-perception, and that tendency of innate biases of humans to protect themselves and make themselves feel capable or related, or whatever it is we're trying to, those fundamental needs that we want to make sure that we feel we've got to be a competent human being. The Dunning-Kruger effect was really nicely mentioned too, and you're talking about the risk of that. And the main thing about the Dunning-Kruger effect is the scope of people's ignorance is invisible to them, and that's especially so. So it's the poorer performers, less competent people tend to overestimate their abilities and are just blind to the fact that they're not prepared or they're not capable. And you mentioned how dangerous that can be, and there was a study in the US on student pilots aviations.
Yep.
And it was the less performing people, those who scored lower on pilot knowledge, pilot knowledge tests, that grossly overestimated their ability. That's really bad news.
Bad
if you
news
think
indeed.
you can land this plane, but actually you've never flown this plane before, or you don't really know what those switches are, and you can't just make stuff up. That's when that the absolute clarity of self-perception is needed, self-awareness is needed in your competency in order to be able to say, which is one of the bedrocks of psychologists and psychology ethics, is to be aware of the limitations of your own competence. That's a requirement of practicing psychologists, to know when you don't know what this is, when you need to stop talking and ask somebody else, or go and find out. So the Dunning-Kruger effect really is quite dangerous, as you rightly point out. It's not some sort of. It is real.
It is real.
And it's interesting in how to get beyond that. And we need to get to the point is how to gain self-awareness, because that's obviously a bad thing. You also pointed out that while it's possible for lots of good reasons that humans don't have a absolutely accurate understanding of their self and their capabilities, behaviors, whatever, and there's no pure accurate answer anyway, but it's where some people are likely to systematically overestimate and systematically underestimate, and both can be, as you point out, quite dysfunctional. And so you alluded first, I think, to narcissism and that narcissistic tendencies, which of course is a personality disorder in extremes. Narcissism, not just interpreting the world and your role in it as you being a primary and most valuable, most valuable person in your world, overestimating your contributions and capabilities and undervaluing others in order to bump you up. So narcissists can be very strong in self-confidence. It can even help their their health, their mental and physical well-being. Narcissists tend to feel good and generally resilient because they create this, wonderful world where they're great no matter what happens. I mean, we're seeing this played out in the US political scene live. And the problem when the bubble is burst. At the other end is those dysfunctions where one undervalues oneself systematically, despite the evidence to the contrary. So even if you are performing well, the mind works against you to undervalue your contributions, your capabilities, your relationships, your future, and that's to be seen in various anxiety syndromes, avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, very, very horrible things for people to be in because they can't get out of it. They can't see themselves out. Their judgment of their personal value is bad. And yes, you took it to imposter syndrome too, the complete self-doubt in the face of obvious talent. Extraordinary.
And I think it also has to be made clear that while we are speaking about things like that, while we project ourselves as discussing our topics and expert in some areas, we are like most people. We also suffer that doubt in our head sometimes, as in, oh, are we really that good at explaining certain things? Are we going to be able to convey certain messages there? I want to put it out there that it is a real thing.
Talk to yourself.
See, I'm doing that already. Immediately, I'm doing that imposter syndrome.
What?
Yes, exactly. So I just want to say that we do suffer from that too. We are not immune to that. So we are very human as most people. So, but we like to be able to be truthful to our listeners and share information as we know it, because if we don't do that, then it doesn't do any justice. But yes, trying to find out who we are, we can depend so much on what we just said. The trait that we have, the motivation, and establishing our own identity. And identity, in a sense, is quite fluid depending on the circumstances and what you want to achieve. Please do not be fixated by an identity, because I know the word identity can be quite complex, and people use it in a very different context, and it could mean very different things. And that could also lead to discrimination in certain ways. But at the same time, because we are evolving as human beings, sometimes we need to explore and we need to see what fits us at this present context. If it doesn't fit us anymore, then we might move on and then we adopt another different identity. We are not saying that you're going to be like a mask individual every time you're incognito doing different things. No, I think it's where we start to develop as we know, as a young baby start to learn about emotions and motivation. They accumulate and assimilate information as they grow. Likewise, I think all of us are still learning, regardless how old you are. Which of course both of us are not going to reveal our age, but regardless of how old we are both learning. We're still sharing, and I think it is very important to understand that identity itself is not as easy as we think it is, which is why psychologists are still doing a lot of research in this area. And I think, James, you brought up this very good point about uh, discussing this and putting it in context with what we had actually talked about the past episodes on our podcast, personality especially, and the motivation and identity is a very good kind of linked up to all those things that we just said. Uh, what other things do you think we should be actually telling our listeners about identity?
Actually, I look at that, the idea of if we understand that that humans are not very good judges of who they are in terms of their personality, motives, or identity. The question is how, and in some ways, there are benefits. There are clear benefits of having a more accurate perception of those things for yourself. If we know typically our behaviors or our motivations and aspects of our identity, what we're comfortable with, then of course that can influence many decisions we make.
Sure.
About jobs we take, crafting of jobs. Again,
Yes.
we're into the personality, motives, and things, and about being. It comes to the idea of being authentic.
Authentic, yes.
So the principles of authenticity. Whereas if you like a plant, if a plant needs a certain environment to thrive and really become its potential, then you need ideally to put the plant in that environment. And for ourselves, if we're aware about what does make us tick, what will make us happy, what will remove stress, where those interests and capabilities lie, then that's where one should, if one can, pursue. So self-awareness, accurate self-awareness, of course, is a benefit. It doesn't mean, of course, if I realize that, oh my goodness, there you go, I'm a raving extrovert and hugely open to experience, and I'm motivated by building deeper relationships, and my identity is still rather fluid, but I just feel self-authored now. I'm not held back by my identity of my nation or culture or parents. I'm free and comfortable to be who I am as a professional, whatever, as a psychologist. Great. How wonderful that is. How self-affirming. Yep. And then you're looking at doors you can open. But sometimes you can't do those things because there are restrictions, resources, other people's needs, whatever. But whatever it is, if you know what those things are, you can come to terms with being who you are, then at least you can make informed decisions and compromises that you're comfortable making, or at least prepared just to tolerate for as long as you need to tolerate it. That's the nature of life too. We're not fully empowered to do everything we would like. So I think those benefits are very important. So the next question really I would suggest would be how to build self-awareness. And we very often, any trainer in a development workshop will throw up Johari window.
Yep.
Yeah, as the number one thing. Here you go.
Yes.
And the idea is that there are things that you know, and there are things that you don't know about yourself.
Yep.
There are things that other people know about you through their experience of you, and there are things that people don't know about you. That creates a nice grid of 4 windows.
Yes.
And the idea is that by exploring what other people know and by reflecting on yourself, you can expand your self-awareness away from just what you know of yourself
Yep.
into the other parts of the window.
Yep.
And that then is a benefit to you. It's empowering, more authentic.
Yes.
So the main vehicle for that, besides reflecting on yourself, doing instruments like personality assessments, motivations, life experience reviews, even just talking out, who you think you are and your life story, classic life story approaches that McAdams does a lot of, to capture identity and the key drivers of it.
Yes.
They do a life story approach to capture motivation. So again, talking it through with a coach, a professional coach in the area, doing personality and motivation questionnaires, reflecting on those things as a whole, your life journey, those around you, trying to build that picture. That's wonderful. That's work you can do yourself.
Yeah.
The other work one can do is to ask other people's opinions.
Yes. That is important. Yes, I totally agree with you. And maybe to add one more point on what you just said, self-awareness is good to have because, as you said already in detail, what you could do with it. But don't have to really beat yourself up if you don't fulfill certain things. And I think this is where self-compassion comes in too. Because if we try to, we lay down everything, we try to achieve too much, and we don't achieve those things, we beat ourselves silly, then you're not going to actually progress. You're going to perhaps backtrack and don't want to do it. And that stop you from discovering yourself and discover things that you want to do. So my kind of take from here is, while you go through the journey of self-awareness, always remember you need to show yourself some compassion because we are only human and we are going to have our good days and bad days. It doesn't really matter as long as you're still on that journey of discovery, and that what should matters, and not just saying, I need to compare with someone else, I need to be better than James, I need to be better than Austin. No, I think it's where, what is your comfort level, the threshold that you're comfortable in discovering yourself, getting your identity, and matches with all your personality, and your motivation, and of course the circumstances that you have, because not all circumstances are going to be ideal for you to flourish, to bloom into a new flower or what have you. But I think it's good to know that you can, but be also mindful that it is not going to be an easy step, because as we said, it is a journey. So it will be a discovery of new things, or maybe hurdles that comes that prevent us from the whole discovery journey. So I think it is important to bear that in mind too. And yes, and this, although it started out like a mythical question, something that is so difficult to answer, but there are ways you could, as an individual, to start on that journey. You can start with a very small step, and then gradually, kind of build the blocks there. And one point that James, you said early on was to ask people, right? Get the feedback, and I think that is a very powerful thing. Human beings are as such, right? We hate to get feedback. We hate to get
Are you
feedback
protecting
from
your
people.
self-esteem?
Yes, because we, at the same time, I
Really
think,
sensitive.
yes, sensitivity, and I think we hate to hear bad comments or bad feedback, because it doesn't kind of sit well with our own ideal identity, I guess. So anything that is uncomfortable, we won't want to listen to. But I would say this would be a wrong approach. Listen. You don't have to be too caught up with what people say. Take it as constructively as you can, and review and reflect. Maybe people see you in a different light. Maybe people see you with a colored lens, but it doesn't really matter. It's their perspective. But how do you put that into perspective for yourself as you start to develop and discover for yourself who you really are? I think that is more important. And one of the things that I have been having conversation with people, that especially during this period of time where work life is so different now, right? The environment has changed. They no longer know why are they doing this job. They no longer know why am I spending so much time. Is it actually worth going through all this at the same time? And I always tell them, look, Those are good questions, but at the same time, take a step back and think, what exactly do you want to achieve from that? If you're asking that question of, am I worth it? Who am I? Etc. As we just said, take it step by step, get the right feedback, do a bit of assessment here and there, and find out what exactly you want, who you are really, uh, who you really are, and then how do you progress from there. And I think this is very important. Don't get too caught up with emotions. Don't get too caught up with the negativity. Give yourself that space to breathe. Give yourself your space to reflect. I think that is very important. Yeah.
Of course, I would agree. Reminds me of again, coaching sessions and feedback for or preparation for doing things like in organizations 360 review work, where the 360 or multi-rater feedback approach is that for existing employees, again, let's look at behaviors that we think are important for performance in a certain job, for example, in a leader, and then in a fairly straightforward questionnaire about behaviors to ask the individual to evaluate themselves on frequency or impact of those behaviors, and at the same time to ask their colleagues, whether that's their peers or their subordinates, their manager. Sometimes the questions will go as far as other people who know them or work with them. That might be suppliers or even customers. Though typically it is the manager of the person, peers and subordinates who give their views, and that they all answer basically the same questions about the same behaviors. To what extent does this person do these things?
Yep.
To what's the impact of these things that you see? So in those sorts of multi-rater reviews, the software then combines that view, says, look, this person, how often does this person say hello in the morning? And maybe the manager's manager doesn't know because he never sees it. He's right on the golf course. Subordinates, the person themselves might say, I always do that. But the subordinates who they're leading says we never see them do that.
Yeah.
We can't remember any time the person does that as typical behavior. And so then we set up the idea of, the person is confronted by different views about behavior. And if those views that feedback is the same, and that's positive, that's great news. I'm just reaffirming, that's what I thought I was. Great.
Yep.
If it's not, then I'm at that moment of challenge where the opportunity is for I either respond intuitively to protect my self-esteem and defend it. And that can be the beginning of, Kubler-Ross response cycle, denial, anger, rejection, the lot. Or, I can just hold it and explore it, seek to understand where this comes from.
Yep.
How is it that we're so different in understanding and seeing behaviors? What I do, help me understand that.
Yep.
That's not as accepting it. It's trying to understand it. Again, people's observations and memories and reflections on behavior, is not perfect either, but it doesn't need to be perfect.
Yep.
It absolutely doesn't need to be perfect. It's trying to give you, that signal in the error. And multiple opinions then, of course, even of those things do differ. But you're looking for a theme that you might be able to process for some good.
Yep.
So when we're doing those sorts of self-evaluations or getting feedback, one of the tricks is always to prepare people for that experience of getting feedback.
Yes.
To help them get ready mentally to be not just willing, but able to receive feedback, able to go through feedback, because our natural response as humans is to protect ourselves if it's negative.
Yes.
So we know that's our programming. We know that's our bias. We know that's how we humans function. So let's prepare ourselves. And we know that in this case, we don't want that automatically to kick in.
Yes.
Because we want to get beyond that. So if we can just reduce that response rate or that response level, so we can get into that seeking to understand phase.
Yep.
That's what we try to do, and that's what, whether you're asking your friends, your family, or you're doing something systematic, like self-awareness questionnaire, personality motives, or a multi-rater questionnaire when you're really going for it at work.
Yep.
You still need to prepare yourself so that you are not just willing but able to accept those contradictions that are inevitably going to come and see them as something good.
Yeah. I think you're so right in that sense. Every time when people receive 360 feedback, they kick into that defense mode, right? Anything that's negative, I want to challenge it. But take it, reflect, why? And I think that is a better way of developing yourself and growth. While you're talking about that, I was just thinking about the extreme where everything is going to be every feedback is fantastic. Everything is good, and this person is going to be feeling, oh yes, my life is fantastic, it's wonderful, everything is going to be good, nothing is going to affect me at all. Even if it's a negative thing, I'll be fine, everything will be okay. It's great to have that kind of positivity in your life, but at the same time, please also be mindful. Overdoing that can create a kind of what we call an optimism bias, right? Where everything becomes happy, everything is positive. Then you fail to understand the challenge in life, because life is so peculiar. They will throw you a curveball, and then when you approach it only in one perspective, you will find it very difficult to deal with it when the reality sets in. So this is also very important, and I think it's very important in a sense because it's part of who we are, our kind of DNA, that we need to be able to deal with different things that's been thrown at us, and it makes us a more well-rounded individual. I think it is a exploratory thing for a lot of people. I believe, and that is why it's always good to have, as what James you were saying, talk to people, get feedback. If you need professional help, come to talk to an organization psychologist like myself and also James. We'll be able to sort it out. We'll be able to help you. But in truth, you have to be willing to explore. You need to be willing to open up and realize that things is not just what you see. There's more to it. If you're really interested in knowing about yourself a little bit better. So I think this is a very good topic today to discuss. Very, very sounded very academic in a sense, but at the same time, it's actually quite practical. There are ways you could actually do to help you to discover yourself in this journey. Yeah,
absolutely. I just add to it. I mean, it's the idea of self-awareness, of course, is a foundation of most personal development models and at work, leadership. The core of all, improvement, if you like, is there's always that self-awareness component, and I think we've been talking about that in terms of the components of it and the ways to get it and the advantages. The advantages are particularly for people who are willing and able to explore those things, that their context enables them to do that and supports them to do that. Sorry. I think it's worth noting, as you did point out as well, is that that's not everybody is ready for that. And in some cases, it may be detrimental to try to go around popping balloons of somebody's self-esteem or the reality that they're built for themselves. It's not uncommon when we discuss coaching cases, just for professional advice, that we may be aware of a client who has got a range of issues that may be in some way deluding themselves, some realities, and yet we feel that it's not right to address that directly at this point. They're not ready, and it will be detrimental to them, or their only choice to deal with that information is to reject it because it's too threatening.
Mm.
So again, we're always dealing with these things. Any journey of self-awareness or adding information, it's the aim is always paramount. Of paramount point is the protecting the well-being of that individual and questioning their authenticity, questioning their identity, questioning and challenging their self-concept can be very, very, very debilitating for people. And
Yep.
you mentioned those with on the verge of disorders, almost that clinical disorder, narcissism or avoidance and so on. Yeah, so I think that's just a word of caution that we want to put into this one. It is typically at work where most people are, like normal working population, they're completely capable and have that range of function to engage with these things. Even people there, one needs to be careful and cautious when going down this journey. But the benefits of it, if you're willing, capable, and supported, of course, can be hugely rewarding for the individual and their group.
Yes. Wow, we both sound very, very serious today. I hope this is not coming true
no!
it's not coming true into the our podcast. But as usual, it's fun having this discussion with you.
Thank you.
I must say this is our own perspective. You can agree, you can disagree, but if you want to put them on paper or you want to ask us any question, please do so by sending us an email to psychchat@omnisci.com, or if you prefer to tweet to us, tweet psych_chat on Twitter. Good. As usual, thank you very much, James, for having to join me today to talk about this topic. And stay tuned. We will have another episode coming up. And if you want to subscribe to us, or you have not subscribed to us, please do so. You can subscribe to this podcast in all the podcast system that you can find us. So thank you very much again, and see you guys soon.